Hello, everybody. I'm doing something a little bit different. Um, I'm going to make more videos like this one, and they're not going to take over a Star Wars slot like they are today. They are today because life has happened, and I really wanted to make this video, and I don't think I'm going to have time to make this video and a Star Wars video tonight, which for publication tomorrow. But thank you for watching. If you are part of my Star Wars community, I am going to be covering the first two chapters of Brandon Sanderson's Stormlight Archive, Wind and Truth. I'm also going to be connecting myself with the books a bit because I see a lot of parallels between myself and Kaladin. I have for, since the beginning of the series. Granted, I've not been through what Kaladin has been through, but what's interesting is that emotion can make you feel as if you've gone through the things Kaladin has gone through. Anyway, so before I go any further, if you guys don't want to know what's in the first two chapters of Stormlight Archive, I thank you for clicking the video. That gives me a view. But I will be spoiling this part of the book. I will be spoiling the past 4 books as well, just because it's context for the content of these first 2 chapters. So, thanks for stopping by. If you're heading back out, don't want to spoil this for you. If you're sticking around, let's talk about Stormlight. First things first, we open with this beautiful image of a star spren. And this is definitely Shallan's sketch of the star spren while she was in Shadesmar. Or she's still currently in Shadesmar, but I will definitely say it is not what I expected. I pictured in my head when it was being described in Rhythm of War as looking something more like this. The hard cut shapes kind of in a sequence with some wings. But I'm very glad I was wrong because this is gorgeous. A very beautiful creature. I did put this picture into Photoshop, up the contrast, changed the brightness a little bit, and I did not find any secrets. Other people might. It's just probably something I didn't notice. The only thing I saw was a vertical line here and a diagonal line here that looks like it could be a piece of the women's script in this world, but that's as close as I got. If anybody would like to help me, I am not sure who this person is in the bottom right corner of this image. Please let me know. Chapter 1. I'm going to dig into some topics about mental health because there are a lot of mental health portions to these first 2 chapters, and of course the 4 books leading up to this. If I say in mental health situation you experience, I'm not actually speaking for someone else's perspective. I'm actually speaking of my own, just things I've found in my own mental health with going to therapy, working on myself, and why I appreciate what is being shown in the first 2 chapters here. So chapter 1, Unfamiliar Ground. The epigraphs. I have a theory for the epigraphs. I'm like 75% positive that the people writing the epigraphs are Kaladin and Szeth, because Kaladin is a Windrunner and Szeth is a Skybreaker, which is highly tied to the concept of truth. And I should have known. I was being watched all my life. The signs were there. Ties in very closely with things later on in the chapters. So that's my theory there. I definitely want to touch on the concept of Kaladin feeling good, not great, but feeling good, and how he's appreciating that he feels good in this moment, because with the kind of depression you've seen in Kaladin, in my own battles with depression, I've found that if you are depressed enough, if I was depressed enough, it would cast a dark shadow on the days that were not bad, which is miserable. It's harder to stay present in a good day, great day, in a joyful moment when you feel an impending sense of doom that you're not going to feel that way again or the next day. Part of that is anxiety. And managing anxiety is another really important part of that, because anxiety will make you think the world is ending when it's not. And it's very hard to break yourself out of that moment. Now, understandably, Kaladin does talk about losing Teft in the past book. The fact that he was hiding in an occupied city and driving himself to physical and emotional exhaustion. So feeling good, considering those things have happened, it's wonderful in his development to see that he's realizing that. And he says a specific line, which is he shouldn't have felt good, which I think is the mindset that, things are not great right now, but I feel okay. And that's something that cognitive behavioral therapy will teach you. It taught me, is that even when things seem doomed or like there's just no way things are going to go well, fearing it and staying in that heightened emotional state too long is not likely to help your situation. And I'm not saying this is a matter of weak will or strong will or anything like that. It's a matter of being able to practice the tools and skills it takes to pull oneself out of it. It's not easy. It is very hard. I went years without ever doing it until one day I did. One day I was able to break through it. And I'm not saying after that day it was easy. Definitely wasn't. But it showed me that it could happen. And subsequently, it got a little bit easier every time. I don't want to confuse this concept with suppressing emotions or feeling or memories or thoughts. It's really not. It's actually the ability to take your heightened emotions in that moment and just put them right here. I'm not saying suppress them, shove them down, never think about them again, make them disappear. No, I'm saying put them right here. And in that moment, if I'm able to, and I still don't do this every single time. It's not one time you do it and it's an on and off switch. It's not. It takes practice, and when you have a better presence of mind in those heightened emotional states, you can take your initial reaction and response and just put it to the side. And that's important because you might be in a situation where crushing anxiety and depression can cause you to shut down and make the situation worse. So instead, you put it over here, handle the situation at hand, and then when things level out and you have a moment to just sit with yourself and think, you bring it back over. And that is a little scary sometimes. Sometimes I don't want to think about the depressing, anxiety-driven state I was in and the way I was feeling in that moment. But I know if I don't, it's just going to come back tenfold and make things worse later. This could be as simple as, holy crap, this is bad. Holy crap, I'm sad. God, this hurts. Go through that feeling until it kind of passes, and you can then look at it and say, it is bad. It could be worse. And as a matter of fact, I think I actually am doing things to make it better. It helps you look at the situation calmly and with a little objectivity, which When emotions are very high, objectivity is very hard because heightened emotional states make you feel like you're being objective and everything is objectively horrible. When a lot of the times, for me, it wasn't. This is a really long tangent to basically say I see Kaladin having a sense of balance. He knows things are bad. He knows things are going to get bad, especially before they get better. But he feels good today, and he's accepting that he can feel good. And he's accepting that when things get bad and he feels terrible again, he's going to do his best to remember that the good days will also happen again too, which is important. Remembering that in the moment is very difficult. Kaladin stepping down as the leader of the Windrunners and kind of separating himself from the war. I totally get it. He was kind of forced to take that time away before. This time away seems to be more of his own volition. And that sense of agency can do wonders for how you feel about an occupation or a situation. Back, I was experiencing burnout for a while, and something that helped me kind of crawl back out of burnout was understanding how I felt about work, and then understanding how I could make work better by changing my perspective. The perspective I originally had with work was that it was something I went to that I felt was taking my time. And it's a very small perspective change that made a world of difference, was that I realized work isn't taking my time. I'm giving them my time. And that gives the agency to me in that situation. It was always what was happening. My perspective of it was warped by burnout. And I went back to work with a kind of regained sense of purpose. I think that's something Kaladin is headed toward. He has the agency to decide not to be in the war right now. And as we find later in the 2 chapters, he decides to go on a mission to Shinovar. That is him exercising that same kind of agency for himself. He's like, I don't want to be a part of the war, but I do want to be a part of this military. And I do want to make impactful decisions and carry out impactful missions and actions while I am still a part of this military. That's what it told me, but that's jumping ahead. I will try to stay on track chronologically through the chapters. I make no promises. Very interesting concept with Urathiro he talks about here is that he's able to control or able to leave longer lasting lashings, which is pretty mind blowing, going from minutes to hours. And I'm from what they're explaining and what they're kind of describing, it seems like a power grid has been turned on in Urathiru. So anytime someone manipulates Stormlight within the tower, it's essentially like plugging a cord into a socket. And the power grid of the tower itself keeps it fueled. So when Kaladin sticks his uniform to the wall, the power of the tower keeps it going. And I thought that's incredibly interesting, and it makes me wonder exactly what is powering the tower. He explains later that it seems infused, and it's infused with a lot of light. And I'm wondering if that's coming from a singularity of some sort. Not entirely sure which one. It could be the Tower Spren, the Tower. So I think it was called Tower Light. It could be that being's singularity, but that usually seems tied to a shard, and that makes me wonder what shard is powering the tower. Either way, that's just what I'm thinking about. I have no exactly firm theories on that. That's just my speculation. All right, guys, we're gonna talk about Syl now, and we're going to show how much of a hopeless romantic I am. So I love romance. I love rom-coms. I love romance in Stormlight, even though, it's such a slow burn in Stormlight, isn't it? But Syl appearing as a full-size being around Kaladin and in more womanly clothing, I would say. Less girlish in her mannerisms. And I wouldn't even say actually less girlish in her mannerisms. She's still pretty girlish in the way she behaves, but she's also dressing in more adult clothing for like the Hava wearing a glove for her safe hand, which, she has no real reason to do that. Other than what I think is happening, which is Syl wants Kaladin to see her as a woman, not as a spren. And she says it. She kind of says it later, where she says, "I want to decide when I'm perceived as a human or when I am perceived as a force of nature." Force of nature. I feel like it's force of nature whenever she wants to get away with pranks and mischief that she's up to. But she wants to be seen as a person by Cal when she's being supportive to him and just being with him. This showed a lot later on. I'll touch on that when I get there. Because I think she's in love with Kaladin. I don't even think she knows she's in love with Kaladin, but she's feeling, I imagine, is the beginning of love that she just hasn't experienced before and she doesn't know what it is. But she wants to see him to see her as a woman. She's making herself shorter than him, which I'm completely reaching in theorizing on this one, but maybe it shows that she's supportive to him. She doesn't want to make herself larger than him and like kind of command over him or anything like that. I feel like she wants to sit in that supportive role to Kaladin, and that's kind of her way of demonstrating that to him. And she said it just feels right. And because honestly, if she wasn't a honor spren, they'd be a match made in heaven. Like she always helps him out of his lowest moments. My wife has done the same for me on numerous occasions. And that is a bond that is very, very strong. So I could definitely see why she's kind of developing those kind of feelings. And I know there's people out there who don't want Syladin to happen. I'm not one of those people. I want Syladin to happen. Whether it means Syl acquires a physical body, or Kaladin, if he dies in this book, which I have a bad feeling will happen, he finds a way to continue existing past death, similar to our wonderful Lord of Scars, Thydakar / Kelsier. Jesus, I don't know why I blanked on Kelsier. Anyway, it could happen, all right? It could happen. I hope it happens. So let's see. What do we move on to here? Okay, so we move on to a conversation between Syl and Kaladin, where he's basically he's thinking about the fact that there has been this deal made with Odium and Dalinar, where they're going to have their battle in 10 days. And essentially, if Dalinar wins, it's kind of I wouldn't say it's a band-aid. Well, it kind of is a band-aid. Like, Odium is still going to be around. It's just he's not going to have as much influence as if he won, where where Dalinar would have to give up, what were they? Alethkar and Herdaz. And also Dalinar would have to become a fused and join Odium. Huge shift in power. Everything's going to go to shit if that happens. But he says this line that I feel like he believes this in this moment, but I don't think it's how it's going to come to pass. He says, I'm sure people are going to die, perhaps people I care about, but I can't be there to help them. Dalinar will have to choose someone else to be champion, and then Syl cuts him off, saying, don't be sad. Don't talk yourself into being miserable, is what she says. But I think he's learning that, with this kind of balance and sense of agency, I think he's going to find, he's going to find later that he thinks it's going to play out this way, but when the moment arises, he's going to feel less pushed into the situation. He's going to see a situation where he wants to help, and he's going to choose to help. Exercising that kind of agency he's found with his progress with his depression. And I think that's going to help him with any sort of freezing from the PTSD he's had in the past. I don't know. I don't know a whole lot about PTSD, but it just feels like that's what's being set up here. Then we move on to a conversation with Kaladin and Syl just being absolutely adorable, because that's what they do. And then Kaladin talks about the fact that he's going to be able to, or the optimistic point of view he has about being able to remember that good days will happen while he's having his bad days. And then, of course, Syl comforts him in that moment, because that's what Syl does. And then we have a very interesting moment where he's standing by the window, and a large collection of Windspren are showing, as well as the Windspren that form his armor, that kind of chill out around him to, in case they're needed. And then Kaladin hears a voice say his name and asking for help, and that he's sorry. He needs to ask more of him. I've seen some speculation on what this voice is. Some people are saying are speculating that it's the Stormfather. I have a sneaking suspicion that this is Honor. Because over the past 4 books, they have made it very clear. Okay, they haven't made it very clear now that I think about it. A lot of people say Honor is dead, right? But there was a conversation early on with Syl where he said, you're in Honor's friend, so you're like a god. She's like, no, a tiny piece of a god. Well, you can't be a tiny piece of a god if the god is dead. She wouldn't be alive, at least. So what I'm thinking is that when enough Windspren or Honor Spren, since they're pretty much indistinguishable from each other, when a lot of them are in one spot, possibly Honor's consciousness is strong enough to communicate, which ties back to the epigraph at the beginning of chapter 1, where he said, I should have known I was being watched all my life. The signs were there. This ties in with another line later on. But that's my theory. I haven't heard anybody else say it. I'm sure somebody's picked up on it, but I'm hopeful that it's Honor. Being that Dalinar is a bondsmith and can seemingly put things back together, almost anything back together, he may be able to reform Honor, and there's a whole nother era of Stormlight to come, and plenty of other eras and other books, and I don't know how long Dalinar is going to persist in this series, but I feel like if Dalinar persisted a very long time in this series, he would want to try and reform Aiden Alcium. But that's my pipe dream theory. So I don't know how much I don't know how exactly that would happen. I don't know how likely that is to actually happen. And also one thing I want to talk about when it comes to the concept of Honor being dead, from what it sounded like, Honor was shattered into a lot of pieces. This is a lot different from what we saw of Preservation dying in the novella with Kelsier. With Preservation, he seemed to be dissolving, which meant possibly what made him a shard was disseminating. And think of it this way. If you have H2O, right, and you stretch out a lot of H2O molecules across a large space, they're still H2O. But if you break that compound into 2 hydrogens, 1 oxygen, it's no longer H2O. I feel like it's just HH and O. Then they're separate pieces. I feel like when Preservation was dissolving, he was becoming HHO. And Honor is just a bunch of H2O pieces scattered about. If that makes sense. If that helps. That's just how I'm seeing it in my head. So now we move on to Shallan, which she doesn't get as much time in the spotlight in these first 2 chapters, but it's very impactful, showing that Testament, her first spren she bonded, is still semi coherent, far more than a normal Deadeye would be. And she speculates on whether or not she can heal her. And that's mainly what I want to touch on in this part. I think how she heals Testament, as Pattern said, is not about re-speaking the oaths. But I do think it heavily depends on what oath was spoken that she broke. And I feel like Shallan has to find a way to reinforce her dedication to that oath in order to repair the bond with Testament. That's just my thoughts there. Yeah, that's mainly what that portion was about. Shallan is still in the aftermath of, I guess, integrating her other personalities from the previous books. But they don't dig too deep into that. And so here's the next line. I first knew the wind as a child. During days before I knew dreams, what need has a child of dreams or aspirations? They live and love the life that is. Which is very interesting because it's a very fanciful perspective of being a child. And it's, I think, something we can all remember is that when we were children, things were simpler. Things were more enjoyable. Things were easier to enjoy because, there were less worries and caveats to having a good time when we were children than there are today. Kind of like how Kaladin thought about, that's later in the chapter. But again, it's talking about wind. It's talking about how the wind seemed to be watching him in the first epigraph, which also leads me to believe that it was Honor. In some very small, minute way, Honor's presence was felt around Kaladin and connected with him because of his affinity and familiarity with the wind. Seeing Kaladin with his brother Orodin is delightful. Because any parent knows what's being talked about here. And showing his perspective is basically what it's like to be a first-time parent. Arden is adorable. He uses the word you to refer to himself because everybody calls him you. And guess what? That's exactly what children do. For a long time, my son would refer to himself in the third person because we referred to him as a third person. But then he eventually learned what I and me meant and adjusted accordingly. My son's almost 4, so he's past that stage in vocabulary. There's some things in here he still does. So playing with blocks, every kid loves blocks, no matter what. I've not seen one that doesn't. My son still plays with blocks. He also throws them. They hurt. We're working on that. He gets more whispers from my guest honor from the wind, saying that he is that Kaladin is needed and that a storm is coming. It's like a foreboding. And then we see a nice exchange between Kaladin's mother and himself, which I definitely see some parallels in my own life, because when you're younger, your parents they suggest or tell you things you need to do for yourself that aren't good for you, and sometimes you don't listen. And sometimes you feel like they're harping on you, but it's for a good reason. And he's now seeing that now that he's older and his mom is still making him eat when he should eat. He appreciates it a lot more than he did before. I appreciate, advice and suggestions from my family a lot more than I did when I was younger, because I had a penchant for figuring out things on my own, whether it was good for me or not. But this is definitely a situation that I still have with my child. Syl's playing with Oradin, and then Syl just flops down next to Hasina and Kaladin and says, "How do small humans keep going? Where does their energy come from?" And that is exactly what it's like. And then Hasina says, "One of the great mysteries of the Cosmere. If you think this is bad, you should have seen Cal." It is a mystery. Like, I don't understand how my son can go outside for 5 to 6 hours, running like a madman, throwing stuff, swinging stuff, playing t-ball, and come back inside, still a burst of energy, running around, being crazy, until right about 10 o'clock, we can get him to sit down. If we can get him to sit down, it's curtains from there. He sits down, he listens to a story, he watches some kids' videos, and then he's out. Like, he drifts away into sleepland. It's getting him to sit down. It's getting him out of that pedal to the metal mode. That is very difficult. And it is exhausting. Because we don't have that kind of energy when we get older. We wish we did. We don't. But I love him to death. It's crazy. Being a dad's great. But then, she says, if you think this is bad, you should have seen Cal. Which is exactly a conversation I've had with my parents, because I'm living with them with my child and my wife. I'll be like, God, where does he get the energy? When does he stop? Why doesn't he stop? And literally this conversation in the book. And my mom's like, you were the same way. You kept going until you passed out. And that's exactly what I'm going through. And it's just a never-ending cycle, I guess. There's also a very simple understanding that they show that a child has about the world in this moment, where Kaladin's mom brings up the idea of Dungspren, which was something he had a fascination with as a child, and he was reluctant to admit. And when he's trying to ask Syl if Dungspren are a thing, Oradin just kind of pops in and says, here it is, poop goes in potty. Get a treat? And so, yes, they're obviously potty training Oradin. and showing that one of the ways you potty train a child is that, hey, you do this thing, not on the floor or in your clothes or in a diaper. You do it in the toilet, get a treat. Real simple reward system. I just found that hilarious. Like, it didn't have to be there, but it was there, and it just made it feel so much more like a family. So, after Lyran comes in with his plans, working with Dalinar to basically up the medical facilities and medical teams in the military during these battles, they show that Kaladin, again, is kind of reflecting on the point that he can just enjoy this moment of peace and joy that he's having right now, which, sometimes in the heat of things, and when you got deadlines in the next couple of days and your brain is just going over, how do I make this happen? How do I do this? When am I going to turn this in? Who do I got to talk to? What do I need from other people? You can try to do, your brain will do that in times when you could actually relax and have peace. And sometimes it takes looking at the situation and just realizing, this is pretty great right now. I think I should just focus on how wonderful this is. Then they talk about Syl making her decision or wanting to be able to decide when she's treated like a person and when she's treated like a force of nature. And we talked about that earlier, but another funny moment was talking about messing with Rock, because he very much treats her like a force of nature and like a goddess. And I really do hope Rock comes back. I don't think he's going to get executed. I don't think he's going to leave the series anytime soon. But I'd like to see him before this. I hope we see him in this book, because if he's not in this book, I'm afraid we won't see him again at all, which would suck. And then we hear the voice of the wind telling Kaladin that he should talk to the bondsmith, which is Dalinar, who had given him the mission to go to Shinovar with Szeth, I'm pretty sure, because from the image that Brandon Sanderson showed us, like a year ago? It was a picture of Kaladin and Szeth looking over a town in what looked like Shinovar. And then we also hear about, we also see that Kaladin is making the decision to put himself in the situation and carry out this mission, rather than feeling spurred into it by desperation or like he has no other choice. And then we show Lyran. It shows Lyran saying, "I wish I had fatherly advice for you, but you've far outpaced my understanding of life, so I guess go and be yourself. Protect. I love you." And this is a beautiful moment, because you just see the pride Lyran has in Kaladin. Fighting with his father about what it meant to raise arms in defense of others and save lives with violence when it's necessary, versus Lyran's original perspective of no violence is ever necessary and only brings more harm. But he has pride in his son for becoming, from what I can tell, for becoming the man he is today. One that saves lives, one that helps people, and one that he gives his full support to. And then the final line was, "And while he'd woken up feeling good, that knowledge, the sense of volition, felt great." So he turned a good day into a great day by being able to execute his own agency in the mission he's about to take. And that's huge. That's going to be huge for Kaladin later on, because I feel like things are going to come to a head. Things are going to happen in Shinovar that's going to make him reflect on his decision not to become Dalinar's champion. And he's going to come to a point where he can make the decision. I think he's going to come to a point where he can make the decision to become Dalinar's champion And it's not going to be because he had no other choice. It's going to be because he believes it is the right choice for him to make, and it's one he wants to make. I look forward to seeing how that goes. Anyway, this is just my thoughts. Things I enjoyed. There's nothing about these 2 chapters I didn't enjoy. Sorry. If you were looking for someone to trash the first 2 chapters, it's not me. I love these books way too much. Anyway, thanks for listening to my ramblings. Have a good morning, day, evening, and good night. And I'll catch you guys in the next video.